So, short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So nice to see everybody here today. It is Tuesday again, and meditation class again. And so this week was an interesting week, a nice week. It's now Katina season, and this past weekend was Katina at the Cambridge Temple. I wasn't able to go this year to that one because there was actually a little meditation event that some people had invited me to and organized. And it's nice to have these kind of events. It was interesting. There was maybe about a bunch of people, maybe like 10 people, and they were all kind of like my age, so like 27 to like, I don't know, I was probably the oldest. I'm 35. I actually forgot and thought I was 36 a couple months ago. So then I realized, wait a minute, I'm actually 35. Anyways, I think they were in their late 20s, early 30s, and their mother and aunt had organized this kind of day of meditation for them. And so they said to me, okay, here it's going to start at 10 and it'll end at 3. And so do whatever you want, you know. So I passed on teaching them cartwheels and watching sports, and we did meditation, kind of a class. So it was interesting. So I tried to go through and do these kind of techniques, show them that there was the various techniques for breath, and then the 4 Brahma Viharas, and then also the contemplation of impermanence. And that was kind of where we finished, you know. And at each stage tried to follow this format that I'd seen one monk who I really respect. His name's Thanissaro Bhikkhu. He does this format when he leads a retreat where after each stage he opens up the floor for questions. So it's a kind of discussion as well. And one of the most kind of common questions that, or one of the ones that seemed to come up a couple of times in various ways, was this kind of a question around motivation. You know? In other words, was a kind of big issue that, okay, people knew that there were these various things that tended to drag them down, and they knew that doing them was harmful, but couldn't stop themselves from doing these things. You know? It's kind of issue of motivation, issue of effort, you know. And so I told them, you know, okay, meditation, the purpose of it, it's not to do just a technique, it's to counter these habits, these bad habits that are in our life. And then this was the kind of question that seemed to come up in a couple different ways. And so I told them a story about how I was in Thailand, and there's many great meditators there, and they are extremely inspiring, and almost put forth like a super, I often don't talk about it because people don't want to hear that, but there in Thailand, traditional Buddhist countries, when you read in the suttas, the Buddha says, spend your day walking back and forth, lie down on your right side at 10, wake up at 2, start walking back and forth again, go on Pindapat, return to the very same hut you were at, and keep doing the same thing. This is the kind of lifestyle that the Buddha prescribes for monks. And there were monks who more or less kind of live that way. Actually, all the senior monks, well, many of them, they call them Kruba Ajahns, these monks who have attained, who are well known to have attained a kind of noble attainment. They're very famous for sleeping just 4 hours a night and basically doing meditation all the rest of the time. And so what I said to them was, okay, well, in Thailand, if you go there, number one thing, if you're with a whole group of people who are doing something energetic, doing something good, that provides motivation right away, you know? So if you're a person who has kind of, one of them was like a chocolate addiction, question came up, said, you have this kind of devil on your shoulder and an angel, and the devil's like, okay, eat a little bit of chocolate, it's good for you, whatever. And how to resist that. And so one of the things that constantly came up, if you're around people who are not addicted to chocolate, who are eating a lot of fruits, that helps. And so if you're in a place like Thailand where people are constantly meditating, there's this huge culture of meditation. They have like 100 people show up for like maybe it's like 50 or more at this. This was just one monastery I was at for lunch dana. Every day show up there, and the village ladies, they call them mayaks, and they're kind of like upasakas. They come there every Wampra, and they meditate for the whole night. And they're often better meditators than the foreign monks. You just kind of see them sitting there, just kind of don't move for for the whole night, and then in the morning they're still there. The whole night they're there. And the foreign monks are kind of doing not to be facetious or anything. There's a training monastery for foreign monks, so they arrive there, not being experienced monks, and we're all trying to stay awake. The old ladies kind of meditating. So you're in a situation like that. It's very easy or much easier to push yourself to stay awake. It's like if she's 65, what am I complaining about? I can do this too. It's kind of motivation just comes from having good friends, call around people who are a good example. And so this is one way to cultivate a kind of motivation to overcome bad habits. It's to seek out people who have the habits that we admire and to become friends with them. And then when we become friends with them, we don't just kind of hang around them. We try to imitate them. So right there actually are kind of two things that kind of go against the grain of a lot of what we do in say, the work world, the business world, something like that. It's because Western economy is based on competition. And promotions at work are based on competition. So if somebody's better than you at something, you kind of try to fight with them to one up your skill level above their skill level. And you don't speak in praise of them that often because that would lower your status relative to their status. And both of you know that you're competing, but nobody says anything about that, But in the Buddhist teachings, it's different. Instead of seeing somebody and wanting to one-up their qualities, when we want to take on a wholesome quality of a person, we actually approach that person and we ask them, how do you do this? So he actually has these kind of recommendations. If a person's very good at making their mind calm, but isn't good at wisdom, go find somebody who's good at wisdom. And when you go up to them, ask them, how do you do this? How do you investigate phenomena? How do you develop dispassion? And it's the reverse for somebody who's good at calm. Now these are kind of things for monks, but his recommendations for lay people is to find friends who are virtuous people. In other words, the people who aren't out drinking, aren't out partying, Maybe they might start sounding like boring people now. But these kind of virtuous people, friends who are doing good things. They don't have to, doesn't matter if they're rich, doesn't matter if they're poor, doesn't matter if they're physically beautiful, physically ugly. the criteria is that they're virtuous, that they're good people, that they're trying to move forward in wholesome qualities regardless of whatever else it is about their background. So this is one thing, finding these people and becoming friends with them, and then asking them about it, talking with them about it, talking with them about virtue, talking with them about putting forth effort. If they're meditators, whatever the skill is we're trying to learn from them, asking them about it, discussing it with them. And then the second part, which actually goes against this typical drive for competition, is to imitate them. So actually, it's reasonable as well. In Western economic system, there's this thing, copyright. In other words, you can't copy somebody else. Somebody else's behavior, somebody else's mannerisms. If we copy that, it's like a lower thing, not something to be done. But in the Buddhist teaching, when we want to take on a quality that somebody has, we actually imitate them. There's actually reasons for this. When we want to learn to develop in a skill or an area we don't have, there are pitfalls in almost everything we want to develop. A person who's developed that skill has already avoided those pitfalls. So when we imitate them, we avoid falling into these kind of traps ourselves. We kind of steer a clear course in that way. So actually, even just recently, I often talk about this kind of monk in the West End, Bhante Saranapala. And so actually, I've seen at the monasteries I've stayed at, they had meditation courses before. But actually, explicitly, when I thought about doing this one, I went up to him and asked him, so how do you do your meditation course? What do you do? And then I imitated him. And then he was talking about Facebook one day, and I thought, well, that's a good idea, And so I imitated him. Say, okay, I'll follow in your footsteps. Why not? It's a good thing to do. If it's working, no reason to reinvent the wheel. And this is a way that we can overcome any obstacles to our motivation in a way that's very pleasant. It's kind of start a meditation course and have to go all the way over here, too much chanting, too much sitting, too little sitting, Dhamma talk too long, Dhamma talk too short, how should I adjust it? It's easier to just follow something initially and then make adjustments. But to do this, it requires us to lower ourselves. Requires us to be humble people. And this again goes against this kind of attitude of competition, because one of the purposes of competition is to make ourselves seem larger than another person. We win a competition, we get that kind of first prize, and maybe we get to stand on the very top of the Pirit Mandapir, at the top of the podium, and everybody kind of looks at us and adores us, right? And when we learn something from somebody in this way, when we follow in their footsteps, it's the opposite. Actually, we're explicitly taking on something that somebody else has done. And when we see that person, we pay them respects for that. That thing you taught me really worked. And we give them kind of respects. We give them credit for it. I learn when people approach us and compliment us, we pass the compliment off to somebody else. Well, I learned this from this person. When this kind of habit becomes very strong, then there's a paradox involved in actually being humble, because when a person lowers themselves, it's kind of like being low to the ground. Like, see these kind of, maybe like a little tree, low to the ground. And there's trees that are very high with very big canopies, very stiff. Now, if a tornado comes through, or very harsh winds come through, the tree that's very high and very stiff gets kind of blown over. The tree that's low to the ground doesn't get blown around. And it's the same thing with being humble. This is why the Buddha recommends this quality of being humble, recommends this quality of lowering. And being humble also makes our world a brighter place. Because when we reflect in this way, actually almost everything that we know how to do has a precedent from somebody else. We wouldn't be able to walk if it wasn't for our parents. Wouldn't be able to talk if it wasn't for them. Whatever new thing gets invented, actually, even in Western society, whatever new invention comes up, it rests on the shoulders of a huge number of inventions, peer-reviewed articles, theories, work done by a huge number of people. So when we reflect on this often, when people praise us, we pass the praise off, Well, this is because of this person I learned from, Our world starts to become bright. When we look around us, we look at the various things around us, it's like, wow, this thing is really good. It's really amazing. It comes from this attitude of looking for the good that other people have done for us. And this gives us motivation. Actually, a lot of the lack of motivation that can occur is often a fear of failure. This kind of fear that if I try this thing out and I don't succeed, these people who I really like are going to look down on me, In other words, they're going to think I'm low. And then my status gets lowered, right? And people treat me bad. And that would be something unpleasant for me. But when we constantly cultivate this attitude of humility, look, whatever success I've gained, a part of that is from my own effort, to be sure, but much of it is from these things that I've learned from other people. We're already low. There's no need to fear failing so much. We're not in competition with somebody else who's going to gloat if we fail. Actually, instead of being in competition, we've received advice from people who now care about how well we do. The person who we went up to, that good friend, that Kalyanamita of ours that we asked for advice because we want to develop that wholesome quality, once we would develop that relationship with somebody, it can be anybody, they start to care about how well we do. And they want to see us kind of progress, Like if you teach anybody anything, you want them to do well. Become something you want from them. And this fear of failure starts to grow less, Now, this person or whoever, they've taught you this, you're doing it for a good purpose, and so there's no need to fear as much. If you fail, you can pick yourself up again. You can ask for more advice, and there's not going to be this whole crowd of people like, yeah, you failed, now I'm at the top of the podium, right? So a lot of this lack of motivation can paradoxically be overcome through humility. A lot of the fear that comes with taking on a new wholesome quality can be overcome with humility. And humility makes our world a bright place. It makes our world a happy place. This may be one of the reasons why sometimes the world can seem a bit dull. If we're not looking for this kind of way that other people have helped us, we don't see the brightness that other people have given, and the world becomes a bit darker. That's one way to overcome kind of a lack of motivation. Asking somebody, associating with somebody who's good at that, and then copying them, imitating them. The one thing, though, in Thailand that gets constantly mentioned, but that also gets mentioned a lot, these monks in Thailand, they kind of praise their teachers, like like whatever happens, it's like, well, it's it often goes back to their teacher, kind of, and they have pictures of their teachers on their altars, and often in their kuttis they have a picture of their teacher, the monk who's taught them the Dhamma. And then the other thing that gets constantly mentioned there, when I talked about this, I don't know how popular it was, but it's true, is constantly over and over again what gets mentioned in terms of motivation is endurance. Now, this isn't necessarily all that attractive of a quality in a kind of Western commercial context, right? Nowadays, when we want something, this is good, right? Not bad to have things quickly, but when we want something, we can go on Amazon, we can order it, and it arrives very easily at our house within a matter of sometimes like a day. You order the thing, and it's like, whoa, it's already here. Barely ordered that. Or we want food, we can just drive right around the corner, pull into a McDonald's, and booyaka. There's booyaka. There's your Happy Meal or a Big Mac which you got right away, no problems. Right? And things are like this. We want a hot meal, there's a microwave. We put the meal in the microwave, we press a button, and 30 seconds later, the thing is steaming hot. Actually, microwaves have gotten much better than when I was young. They're not even lopsided. Like your whole food is hot, not just like one portion. They kind of rotate and do induction. So in other words, all these things have gotten very easy, But actually, these things are kind of created, by humans to make their life easy. And the more, you could say, I guess, a lifestyle gets divorced from some of the natural principles in the world, the less we realize, again, how much effort actually went into making these things. How much effort this system requires to sustain itself, And so we forget that all these easy things come from effort, come from endurance. If we're a farmer, for example, they already know, right? You plant a seed, you water the seed, you keep watering it, and you basically put up with whatever difficulties come until the seed sprouts. There's just no choice, right? It's completely obvious to somebody who has to engage in a profession like that. What's required to make things grow. And these are actually principles of nature. These are principles in our mind. That when there's a difficulty that comes, in ending that difficulty, it takes a level of endurance. The very fact that it's difficult means that overcoming it will take endurance, So in other words, we can't press a button and make it go away. This is where a lot of suffering comes from. A difficulty arises, we try to press a button and make it go away. Sometimes literally, press the TV button and it goes away for 3 hours. But then it comes back again a little louder, so we turn the volume up. We watch something more distracting. Okay, so it comes back again, so we press the button again. We grab some food. So now we're watching TV and eating food. Trying to distract, trying to press the button to make these things go away. But it doesn't work that way. That's not the principle in nature, actually. Principle in nature is that when a difficulty arises in life, such as something we need motivation to overcome, a big part of overcoming it is putting up, learning to develop a thick skin around the unpleasant feelings that arise when we're doing something good. That desire for chocolate comes up, we don't do it. Now we've got this unpleasant feeling. Right? It won't go away if we push a button. But the nice thing about this is, it's just like, sometimes use metaphor. I remember when I was a kid, and I was chopping vegetables. I was like 4, or I think my mother was chopping, and I was like, "Can I try to chop?" Or maybe I actually was. I can't remember what I was up to. But anyway, somehow I got a hold of a knife, and I was chopping a vegetable, and I chopped it. Maybe I was probably older than 4, and it cut my index finger. It was kind of like it seemed like the worst cut ever, and like all this blood was coming out. And I was just like, I still remember it very vividly. I was just like crying. I was like, I'm going to die. Like I felt like this cut was the end of the world, And now as an adult, sometimes you get a cut and you don't even know it's there, It's only at the end of the day you look at your body and you're like, oh, I've got a cut there. It's bleeding. And this comes because, at that time, I cut my finger. My mother didn't freak out. She's like, here's a Band-Aid. That was the kind of end of it. And so you learn, if I endure this pain, no big deal. Things will get better. It's not a big problem. And eventually, you don't even feel the cut. And this is the same way with motivating ourselves to do things that are difficult but unpleasant, motivating ourselves not to eat the chocolate. If we resist the first time, it's like that kid who kind of cuts his finger, blood's coming out, it's like, oh God. But the more we cultivate this faculty of endurance, which the Buddha actually recommends very strongly in many suttas, we eventually just stop noticing to a great deal the difficulties that are involved in giving up some of these things. We develop a thicker skin. You know? And eventually it doesn't even come, it comes less and less into the equation. Is this pleasant or is it unpleasant? The main question is this good or bad? Trying to find the dividing line. So in other words, this motivation is something that we can build until it's not even really necessary to notice whether it's difficult or hard. It's just a matter of whether or not I should do it. You know? That becomes the main issue, you know? Is this something that's worth doing or not? And there's a lot of investigation right there, you know? But this type of motivation is overcome through what is developed through what these Thai masters called oton. They constantly said that all the time, you know? It's maybe not a word that would sell a lot of books. It means endurance, you know? But as we continually develop this faculty of endurance, we become a person who, when the wind blows, doesn't break. You know? Something difficult happens in our life, we don't break. You know? It is this kind of faculty of toughness, you know? And that's not to say it in a harsh way, like a drill sergeant. The Buddha teaches us these things because they are things we can grow in, you know? We can develop these kind of friendships. We can take this kind of heart root, you know? Heart root of having a teacher, having somebody we're learning from, somebody who cares about us, somebody we care about, somebody who wants to see us develop in this skill. This gives us a lot of motivation, you know? And we can also, what we might take this kind of like tough root, you know? Both these things can come together. This root of kind of developing this faculty of endurance. Okay, I know this is bad for me. I'm not going to do it. Setting the line and then not crossing it. You know? Bit by bit by bit. Doing this with smaller things, building up to larger. You know? And the day comes when we do these kind of things, sometimes that kind of teaching can seem a bit harsh, like, okay, you don't do this. You know, that's why you don't often get it. But when we learn to do this ourselves, the really nice thing is we develop a kind of self-confidence, you know? We start off dependent on another person, but eventually we develop this kind of capacity to stand on our own, you know? Start off with our mother telling us, don't worry, it's okay, that cut will heal, and the day comes, we get a cut ourselves, we know what to do on our own. You know? We know how to resist on our own. And a lot of confidence can come from that. A lot of happiness can come from that. And a lot of the fear that comes from putting forth effort in unknown areas disappears when we start to gain in confidence bit by bit in this way. You know? So a lot of the advancement in the Buddha's teachings are like this. They're things that we can come at from multiple angles, you know? From the angle of the heart, from the angle of the head, you know? From the angle of things that are pleasant, from the angle of things that are unpleasant. But it's all for the sake of gaining in greater happiness in the future. For the sake of overcoming the difficulties that are there with chocolate addictions, with addictions to videos, with addictions to whatever it is. For getting rid of these addictions and going further, for getting rid of our addiction to hatred, for getting rid of our addiction to craving, for getting rid of the addiction to delusion, and for getting rid of the addiction to suffering. And there's nothing more to do after that. That's the end of all addictions. Okay? So there's some thoughts today on motivation and a couple of ways to cultivate it. And I think I'll leave that for reflection. Does anybody